Beloved brethren, in every age, the question is asked, why are voices silenced? Why are those who dare to speak contrary to the world's fleeting fashions met not with reasoned disputation, but with hatred, ridicule, and even destruction? It is because truth, when uttered with courage, becomes a flame. And the powers that love darkness cannot abide the flame. They would rather extinguish the light than allow their falsehoods to be exposed. Thus, throughout history, prophets, teachers, reformers, and defenders of conscience have been cast aside, condemned, and slain, not because they were guilty of crime, but because their very witness disturbed the comfort of the powerful. Let no man deceive himself. To kill a voice is not merely to end a life, but to betray the dignity of reason itself. For when error cannot endure debate, it chooses suppression. When falsehoods cannot stand before truth, they take up the sword. Yet every act of suppression is itself a confession of weakness. From the beginning of time, the just have suffered at the hands of the unjust. Cain slew Abel because Abel's offering was pleasing. The prophets were stoned because they rebuked kings. The teacher himself was nailed to the cross not for crime, but for truth. Shall we then marvel if even in our day those who speak with clarity are met with wrath? But, my children, know this: the voice of truth cannot be buried. Though a man be struck down, his witness remains, echoing across generations, calling forth courage in those yet unborn. For no tyranny endures, no violence silences forever, and no death erases the eternal law written in the human heart. Let us then not be cowed by the spectacle of silenced voices. Rather, let us be strengthened by their witness. If they are hated, it is because they spoke with honesty. If they are opposed, it is because they did not bow to idols. If they are struck down, it is because their words touched eternity. Therefore, brethren, do not ask why they are killed. Ask instead, why do we still fear to speak? For every silenced man becomes 1,000 whispers, and every whisper becomes a shout, until truth, scorned, suppressed, crucified, rises again in glory. In every age of man's pilgrimage upon this earth, there arises the unchanging drama between those who bear witness to the truth and those who prefer the shelter of falsehood. It is a conflict as old as history itself, born not of chance but of the fundamental condition of the human soul, which wrestles between light and darkness, between the noble call of conscience and the easy allure of comfort. When a voice dares to speak that which is right, just, or eternal, it disturbs not only the errors of the day, but the entire edifice of power built upon those errors. That is why, through centuries, we see voices of truth met not with debate, not with earnest consideration, but with hostility, suppression, and even destruction. The world does not kill truth because it is false, but because it is true, and truth unsettles the foundations of worldly dominion. Those in positions of comfort and authority often cloak their motives in noble appearances. They speak of order, peace, and stability, yet beneath these words lies a fear of disturbance. For the truth never leaves the powerful undisturbed. It questions their authority, their wealth, their dominion over the minds of men. Truth does not flatter, it lays bare. And when it lays bare, it unmasks not only error, but the frailty of those who profit by it. To silence the voice of truth is therefore not merely an act of malice. It is an act of self-preservation for those who have built their rule upon the shifting sands of falsehood. They would rather remove the man who speaks than confront the mirror he holds before their face. This pattern repeats across the annals of history. The seers and prophets were persecuted not because they deceived, but because they revealed. When Nathan rebuked the king, it was not for lack of loyalty, but because loyalty to God came before loyalty to the throne. When Jeremiah spoke of ruin, the rulers sought to cast him into the pit, not because his words were empty, but because they rang with an uncomfortable certainty. When Socrates drank the hemlock, it was not for corruption of youth, but for awakening their minds to what lay beyond custom and convention. And when the teacher himself was brought before rulers, he was condemned not for a crime, but because his words unsettled the foundations of priest and empire alike. These examples stand as testimony that the silencing of truth is not born of its weakness, but of its strength. The comfort of the powerful rests not only in their wealth or armies, but in the agreement of the multitudes. To command a people, it is often enough to command their imagination, to shape their thoughts, to weave a veil of illusions which tells them the world is as their rulers say it is. But truth, when spoken clearly, pierces through that veil. It awakens sleepers. It calls men to examine, to question, to doubt the narrative imposed upon them. Such a voice is more dangerous than a sword, for a sword may strike the body, but truth seizes the soul. Thus, rulers who fear not the weapons of enemies fear the word of a solitary witness. They can endure armies, but they tremble before conscience set aflame by truth. And so we find that the silencing of such voices is not only a reaction of fear, but also a defense of false peace. For truth disturbs. It unsettles not only kings and princes, but also common men who would rather remain in the ease of ignorance than be roused to struggle. The prophet is stoned not only by rulers, but by crowds who cannot endure the burden of hearing that their way of life, their customs, their idols are false. Comfort is threatened whenever truth is spoken. To preserve that comfort, men will shout down exile or destroy the messenger. They will say he is divisive, dangerous, a threat to harmony. Yet what harmony is it that crumbles at a word? It is the false harmony of men united not in righteousness, but in the sleep of complacency. Thus the voices of truth are always unwelcome to the guardians of the present order. They are accused not of speaking clearly, but of stirring strife. They are told their words are harsh, when in fact their words are simply honest. They are said to break unity, when in truth they reveal that unity was already broken, founded upon lies and illusions. What ruler or multitude welcomes a voice that tells them their prosperity is unjust, their pleasures are hollow, their power is fleeting? What age of men has embraced the one who warns them that their path leads to destruction? Such a voice unsettles comfort, and comfort is the idol most dearly adored. But if we look closely, the persecution of such voices is itself a confession. When a man's words are false, the powerful need not silence him, his words fall of themselves. Lies collapse under the weight of time, and empty speech vanishes like smoke in the wind. But when a man's words endure, when they cut deeply into the conscience and echo beyond his death, this is proof that what he bore was not invention, but truth. The hostility shown toward him is the unwilling testimony of his enemies. They destroy him not because he is wrong, but because he is right. They cannot endure his presence, for his presence itself exposes their error. This is why voices of truth disturb the comfort of the powerful. They cannot be domesticated, they cannot be bought, and they cannot be made to flatter. They carry within them a spark of eternity, and eternity is the greatest threat to temporal power. The mighty build their houses upon the sands of the moment, but the truth speaks with the weight of ages. The mighty seek approval from crowds, but the truth speaks to the solitary conscience. The mighty rely on force and fear, but the truth relies on reason and light. And though swords can slay a man, they cannot slay the truth he has spoken. Therefore the silencing of voices is not an accident of history, but a necessity for those who wish to preserve a false order. It is not because these voices err, but because they succeed. They succeed in awakening souls, in disturbing consciences, in stripping away illusions. They remind mankind that there is something higher than comfort, something nobler than conformity, something more enduring than the applause of the present age. And those who profit by falsehood, those who reign by illusion, those who rule by fear cannot abide to see their edifice crumble before the breath of a single honest voice. Suppression of speech has always carried within it a silent admission of weakness, though those who engage in it imagine themselves strong. When an argument cannot withstand the test of reason, when it falters in the open exchange of ideas, those who hold it resort not to persuasion, but to coercion. They trade the power of truth for the force of silence. To muzzle a man is not to prove him wrong, it is to confess that his words have struck at the heart of error so precisely that no counter-argument can prevail. The suppression of speech is not, therefore, the triumph of power, but the betrayal of it, for genuine power rests upon the persuasion of truth, not the intimidation of silence. If an idea is sound, it flourishes in the light. It welcomes discussion, examination, and even opposition, for these only confirm its solidity. The stone tested by fire emerges stronger, the tree rooted in deep soil grows firm despite the storm. So, too, with truth it endures and even grows when subjected to scrutiny. It is only falsehood that dreads exposure. Falsehood thrives in shadows, whispers, and imposed conformity, but it withers when brought into the open where minds are free to test it. Thus, when rulers, leaders, or masses seek to silence a voice rather than debate it, they unconsciously reveal that their position cannot endure the daylight of reason. This principle is not merely philosophical but historical. In every age, regimes built upon fragile lies have worked feverishly to silence dissenting voices. They have banned books, imprisoned thinkers, exiled poets, and executed prophets. The Roman emperors who demanded worship of their image feared not the loyalty of citizens, but the courage of those who would refuse to bow. The inquisitors who burned heretical manuscripts betrayed not the majesty of faith, but their own insecurity in defending it. The kings who outlawed certain philosophies did so not because those philosophies were unworthy of attention, but because they feared their compelling nature. In each case, suppression served as testimony. These rulers did not trust their own strength to prevail in honest dispute, and so they relied upon force to do what reason could not. Suppression also reveals the frailty of the human heart when confronted by uncomfortable truths. For even among ordinary men, the impulse to silence rather than engage springs not from confidence, but from fragility. A man who is secure in his belief welcomes the challenge of another, for he knows that either he will strengthen his own conviction or refine it by correction. But a man who knows, even dimly, that his foundation is weak reacts with anger, mockery, or violence when challenged. He cannot bear to hear what threatens his comfort, so he seeks to remove the source of disturbance. This is why families, communities, and societies alike often prefer to drive out the dissenter rather than face the unsettling labor of questioning their own assumptions. Moreover, suppression corrodes the very principle of human dignity. To silence another is to deny him the faculty that most distinguishes man from beast, the capacity to reason and to speak what reason discovers. By refusing to engage in discourse, the suppressor not only reveals his own weakness, but also strips his victim of the right to be heard. Yet in so doing, he inadvertently grants his victim a new power, the dignity of one who is feared. For why should a single voice be feared unless it carries weight beyond itself? Why should the words of one man trouble an empire unless those words expose the empire's hollowness? The silenced man, far from being diminished, is magnified by the very act of suppression, for it proclaims that his words contain something too potent to be tolerated. In the marketplace of ideas, truth should prevail by the strength of its content. When an argument is censored, however, it becomes marked with a kind of sacredness, a forbidden quality that draws attention and curiosity. The attempt to smother it often ensures its survival in hidden places, from which it spreads all the more powerfully. History testifies that ideas once censored have returned with greater force, carried in whispers until they became shouts. The more authorities strive to stifle them, the more they reveal their inability to disprove them. Thus, suppression is not the grave of truth, but the cradle of martyrdom. The voice silenced becomes the voice remembered. The book burned becomes the book most read. Consider also the intellectual dishonesty that underlies suppression. To silence opposition is to abandon the noble contest of ideas, replacing reason with domination. It is to proclaim that one's argument cannot win by merit and must therefore prevail by force. In this sense, suppression is nothing more than the confession of defeat spoken in another language. It is the gesture of one who admits inwardly, even if he will not admit outwardly, that his position is indefensible. He may command the instruments of power, yet he lacks the only power that endures, the ability to persuade free minds. In this way, the tyrant, the censor, the silencer is always weaker than the voice he suppresses, for the voice depends on truth, while the tyrant depends on fear. The weakness revealed by suppression extends beyond the individual to the society that tolerates it. When a people allows speech to be curtailed, it demonstrates that it too fears confrontation with truth. It chooses safety over honesty, comfort over reality. Such a society grows brittle, for its peace rests not on genuine unity, but on the forced absence of dissent. The cracks remain beneath the surface, and when they finally burst forth, the collapse is all the more devastating because no honest debate was allowed to mend them. In this way, suppression plants the seeds of future ruin. Yet those who suppress speech rarely see themselves as weak. They cloak their actions in the language of protection, claiming they defend the common good, preserve order, or guard against harm, but their very insistence upon silencing betrays them. If their case were truly just, they would welcome the chance to prove it in the arena of open discourse. They would let error reveal itself by its own contradictions. Instead, by smothering speech, they reveal their fear that the supposed error may in fact expose their own. What they claim to be shielding society from is often nothing more than the sharp sting of conscience that their own rule cannot endure. This paradox lies at the heart of every act of suppression. Those who wield power to silence speech declare strength, but in truth they confess weakness. They wield authority not with confidence in their cause, but with dread of exposure. Their silence is not victory but surrender, for reason has already judged them unworthy to contend. From the dawn of history, a pattern emerges so constant that it cannot be dismissed as chance or accident. The just are always persecuted by the unjust. It is not the corrupt who are cast out, nor the deceivers who are silenced, but rather those who live and speak with clarity of conscience. This reality, repeated in every land and every century, reveals a truth about the nature of justice itself, that it unsettles those who profit from injustice. The man who acts uprightly becomes a rebuke, not only by his words but by his very existence. His honesty exposes dishonesty, his integrity shames corruption, his courage unmasks cowardice. Thus the unjust, unable to endure such a presence, turn upon the just with hatred, mockery, and violence. This conflict was seen even at the beginning, when Cain slew Abel. Abel's offering was accepted not because of wealth or cunning, but because it was sincere, born of obedience to the eternal order. Cain, resentful and unwilling to amend his own heart, could not endure the silent testimony of his brother's righteousness. He did not strike Abel for wrongdoing, but for being right. In that act lies the first image of the eternal struggle. The unjust cannot tolerate the just, for the just remind them of what they ought to be, and what they have chosen not to become. The same truth appears in the lives of the prophets. Each one raised his voice not for personal gain, but to call the people back to fidelity and justice. Yet they were mocked, imprisoned, and slain. Why? Because their words pierced too deeply into the comfort of the powerful. Kings who abused their thrones did not want to be told their reign was corrupt. Priests who profaned the sacred did not want to hear that their rituals were empty. Crowds that followed idols did not want to be warned of their folly. The prophets were persecuted precisely because they were faithful. Their lives bore witness to a higher standard, and that witness became unbearable to those who had chosen the path of falsehood. History beyond the sacred record repeats the same pattern. Socrates questioned the conventions of his city, not with arrogance but with relentless inquiry. His crime was not deceit but honesty, not corruption but truth. Yet he was condemned to death, because his questioning exposed the hollowness of established pretenses. The philosophers and poets who came after him knew that his trial was less a defense of law than a fear of truth. His example shows that whenever a man lives for what is true, he becomes intolerable to a society that prefers illusion. This persecution is not confined to individuals, but extends to communities. Whole groups who have chosen to live in justice often find themselves despised by the world around them. Communities of faith, laborers who demand fairness, citizens who resist tyranny. Such groups are labeled dangerous, not because they are criminals, but because their solidarity reveals the weakness of oppressive powers. Their very existence proclaims that another way is possible, and this proclamation enrages those who depend on submission and silence. The unjust lash out not because they are secure, but because they sense their own fragility before the witness of the just. The persecution of the just also arises from envy. The unjust, Though they may outwardly display strength, inwardly recognize their lack. They see in the just a peace and a dignity they themselves do not possess. The just man does not need flattery or applause, he stands firm by conscience alone. This independence infuriates the unjust, who rely on appearances and control. Envy, once rooted in the heart, grows into hatred, and hatred into violence. Thus the just are driven out, not for wrongdoing, but because they embody what the unjust long for but refuse to embrace. Another reason the just are persecuted is the threat they pose to false unity. Societies often build a counterfeit harmony upon compromise, silence, or shared corruption. The just man refuses to partake in such illusions. By speaking plainly, he reveals the cracks in the supposed unity. He shows that peace built upon lies is not peace at all. For this he is accused of division, though in reality he is the only one who truly honors unity by refusing to sacrifice truth. Yet the multitude, preferring the illusion of harmony, condemns him as a disturber of order. The just are persecuted also because they live according to a standard higher than human approval. Their loyalty is not to passing powers, not to crowds, not to fleeting fashions, but to the eternal law written within the soul. This fidelity places them beyond the reach of manipulation. Rulers who depend on fear cannot sway them, because they do not fear the loss of comfort or even life itself. Masses who demand conformity cannot bend them, because their conscience bows only to what is true. This independence makes them dangerous to all who seek control, and for this reason they are attacked with greater fury. Yet persecution itself becomes a testimony. When the unjust strike at the just, they reveal more about themselves than about their victims. They reveal that they cannot endure righteousness, that their power is threatened by truth, that their authority is hollow when confronted with conscience. The blood of the just becomes a mirror in which the corruption of the unjust is reflected for all to see. Far from silencing the witness of the just, persecution often amplifies it. The martyr's death speaks more loudly than his life, and his memory inspires others to take up the same cause. The pattern also reveals the paradoxical strength of the just. Outwardly they appear weak, defenseless before the might of empires, crowds, and rulers. Yet inwardly they are stronger than all who oppose them, for their strength is drawn not from arms or applause, but from truth itself. The unjust may have power for a time, but their power is always anxious, always unstable, always threatened by the presence of even a single righteous voice. The just, though persecuted, remain steadfast, for their foundation is unshakable. Their constancy confounds the unjust, who cannot comprehend how one without armies or riches can stand unmoved in the face of force. This unchanging conflict between just and unjust is woven into the fabric of human history, because it is woven into the fabric of the human heart. Every man, in choosing his path, must decide whether to stand with truth or with convenience, with conscience or with compromise. Those who choose justice will always find themselves in conflict with those who reject it. The unjust cannot help but persecute, for the very existence of the just testifies against them. And the just cannot help but be persecuted, for their fidelity shines too brightly in a world that often prefers shadows. Truth, by its very nature, resists burial. Men may strive with all their might to silence it, to cover it with ridicule, to drown it in noise, or to erase it through violence, yet time and again history proves that truth rises where it was thought extinguished. It is like a flame smothered by hands. For a moment it seems to flicker and die, but the embers remain alive beneath the ashes, ready to break forth again with greater brightness. The attempt to bury truth is never its end, but the beginning of its wider witness. Those who strike at the voice of truth create not silence but echo, not oblivion but memory, not triumph but testimony. Every martyrdom illustrates this paradox. The one who falls does not vanish into obscurity, rather his words and deeds are magnified beyond his life. The sword or the noose, the fire or the prison cell, which were meant to annihilate, become instead the instruments of remembrance. A man silenced in body becomes louder in spirit, his testimony carried on the lips of others who saw in him an unwavering fidelity. The more violently he is opposed, the more enduring his image becomes. The unjust imagine that killing a witness erases his words, but it only seals them in permanence, written not merely in books, but in the memory of the people. The rise of truth after attempted suppression is not only a matter of human remembrance, but also of the mysterious law that governs conscience. Conscience cannot forget what it has once encountered with clarity. A society may mock or kill the messenger, yet the words he spoke remain lodged in the heart like a seed. They germinate in silence, grow in hidden places, and when the appointed time comes, they bear fruit in new generations. What was shouted down in one era rises to dominate the next. What was despised in the moment becomes revered in retrospect. The persecutors may win applause in their time, but history delivers a harsher verdict, elevating the victim while condemning the oppressor. This is why those who seek to bury truth always fail. They strike with violence, but violence can reach only the body. They manipulate with lies, but lies crumble when exposed to the light. They surround men with fear, but fear cannot erase the whisper that stirs in the soul. Even when truth seems utterly defeated, when its voice is silent and its defenders are gone, its very absence cries louder than its presence once did. People begin to ask why such fury was directed against it, why so much force was needed to destroy it, and in their questioning they rediscover the very truth that was suppressed. In this way, the unjust become unwilling heralds of the very message they sought to annihilate. The endurance of truth is visible not only in grand historical struggles, but also in the smallest acts of courage. A man who speaks honestly in the face of ridicule plants a seed in the hearts of those who hear him. Perhaps they laugh, perhaps they scorn, but later, in the quiet of their own reflection, his words return. They cannot be unheard. Another man who suffers quietly for refusing to betray his conscience gives silent testimony more powerful than loud speeches. Others see his constancy, and though they may not admit it, they are moved. The witness of truth lingers, spreads, and multiplies, even where it was intended to be suffocated. The unjust, blinded by the desire for immediate victory, cannot see this paradox. They believe that removing a voice ends its influence, but in reality they enlarge it. A silenced man becomes a symbol, a forbidden idea becomes more alluring, a martyred life becomes the seed of a movement. It is the peculiar power of truth that it does not need protection by force, for even in defeat it triumphs. Indeed, its triumph is often greater because of the defeat. Bloodshed for truth cries out louder than voices. Exile for truth carries words farther than free speech. Chains for truth break more strongly than liberty itself. The persistence of truth is also bound to its nature as something greater than man. Truth does not originate in human will. It is not the invention of rulers or the creation of crowds. It exists before them, above them, and beyond them. To oppose it is to wage war against reality itself, and no power, however mighty, has ever succeeded in overturning reality. Kingdoms rise and fall, empires flourish and decay, ideologies burn brightly and vanish like sparks, but truth endures like the sun. Attempts to obscure it may hide its light for a season, as clouds obscure the sky, but the sun remains, and in time it breaks through again with renewed radiance. The memory of those who have borne witness to truth demonstrates this endurance. Their lives and deaths become a kind of scripture written in history. Abel still speaks though his blood was spilled in the field. Socrates still questions though his lips were silenced by poison. The prophets still cry out though their bodies turn to dust. The teacher still calls the world, though rulers thought his crucifixion the end. Their persecutors are long forgotten, their empires crumbled, their judgments overturned, but the voices of the just resound with greater force than ever. The grave has never proven strong enough to contain truth. There is also within human nature an irrepressible attraction to what is true. Men may flee from it, may despise it, may curse it, but they cannot eradicate the longing for it. Suppression can delay its recognition, but cannot abolish the desire. Even in societies that have turned violently against truth, generations arise who yearn for what is real and who rediscover what was cast aside. The human heart, though clouded, cannot be permanently severed from the light it was made to seek. Thus, whenever truth is buried, it is like a seed hidden in the earth, destined to rise again with greater vitality. The testimony of martyrs and witnesses proves that burial is not destruction, but multiplication. When a single man falls for truth, countless others are awakened. They see his courage, they hear of his fate, and their own consciences are stirred. What was once a solitary voice becomes a chorus. What was once an isolated act becomes a movement. The persecutors, intent on erasing memory, instead inscribe it more deeply into the conscience of mankind. In every generation, examples abound of truths once despised, becoming the very foundations upon which future societies are built. What was rejected yesterday becomes honored tomorrow, and the blood of the slain becomes the mortar of new civilizations. This is why the burial of truth is always temporary, for it belongs not to time but to eternity. Time itself works in its favor, stripping away illusions, exposing falsehoods, vindicating the witness of those who stood firm. The persecutors believe they are victorious when the voice is stilled, but time proves otherwise. The longer the suppression, the stronger the eventual return. What was hidden bursts forth with renewed vigor, bearing the authority not only of reason but of suffering endured for its sake. And when it rises, it comes with a force no persecution can withstand, for it carries within itself the undeniable stamp of what is eternal. The question that arises in every age, when the just are silenced and truth is struck down, is not only why they were hated or why they were destroyed, but why so many continue to fear speaking. The silence of the multitudes, more than the rage of persecutors, allows injustice to flourish. It is easier to ask why the courageous are targeted than to examine why so many shrink back from courage themselves. In that hesitation lies the deeper mystery, for persecution would lose much of its power if it were met with a multitude of voices instead of isolated individuals. The persistence of fear among the many is the soil in which the violence of the few takes root. Fear to speak is often born of the instinct for safety. Men cling to their livelihoods, their reputations, their social ties, and they imagine that truth spoken aloud will cost them these treasures. They measure the price of honesty not against the eternal value of conscience, but against the temporary comfort of security. The thought of being mocked, excluded, or punished looms larger in their minds than the quiet erosion of integrity that comes from silence. They watch others suffer for daring to speak and conclude that it is better to remain hidden, better to preserve themselves, even if it means betraying what they know to be true. This calculation, repeated in countless hearts, creates the great silence in which oppression thrives. Yet the fear is not only for safety but also for acceptance. The desire to belong runs deeply in the human soul. To speak truth when it contradicts the opinion of the crowd feels like stepping into isolation. Few can endure the loneliness of being set apart, the coldness of seeing once friendly faces turned away. Thus, even when conscience whispers, many choose conformity over solitude. They suppress their own voices so that they may remain in harmony with the multitude, forgetting that the harmony they preserve is only the harmony of error. In preferring fellowship with men over fidelity to truth, they surrender not only their voice but their dignity. Another root of silence lies in the habit of doubt. Men persuade themselves that perhaps the matter is not so urgent, that perhaps the truth is not so clear, that perhaps someone else will speak in their stead. By multiplying excuses, they ease the burden on their conscience. They convince themselves that silence is prudence, that quietness is wisdom, that waiting is patience. But in reality, their hesitation is fear disguised as caution. It is easier to clothe cowardice in the garments of prudence than to face it as it truly is. And so countless opportunities for witness are lost, not because men do not see the truth, but because they refuse to act upon it. The fear of speaking also grows from the illusion that one voice cannot matter. A single man looks at the vastness of the world, the multitude of falsehoods, the strength of powers arrayed against truth, and he despairs. He tells himself that his words will vanish like a drop in the ocean, that his witness will change nothing. But this reasoning forgets the mysterious power of conscience and history. Great movements have often begun with solitary voices. The prophets spoke alone before kings and nations. The philosophers raised questions that outlived the cities that condemned them. The martyrs bore witness in silence and suffering, and their testimony echoed through centuries. To say that one voice does not matter is to deny the very evidence of the past. Fear of insignificance keeps many silent, yet every silence multiplies the dominion of error, while every voice raised, no matter how small, becomes part of a chorus that cannot be extinguished. The reluctance to speak is further fed by the false hope that silence will shield one from danger. Men see that those who speak are attacked, and they reason that if they remain quiet, they will be spared. But this hope is vain. Injustice does not stop with the silencing of a few, it seeks total dominion. Those who remain silent today may find that tomorrow they too are compelled, not only to silence, but to active participation in falsehood. The man who refused to speak when conscience called will be asked later to speak what he knows to be false, and lacking the habit of courage he will comply. In this way, silence does not preserve safety, it prepares the way for deeper bondage. Another cause of fear is the misunderstanding of sacrifice. To speak truth often demands cost, loss of comfort, of favor, of position, sometimes of life itself. Many look upon this cost with dread, imagining it as unbearable. Yet history shows that those who bore such costs found within them a strength greater than they imagined. Sacrifice, when embraced for truth, does not destroy the one who bears it but transforms him. Those who fear to speak because they fear sacrifice fail to understand that the deeper loss lies in silence, which erodes the soul from within. To surrender one's voice is to surrender one's very self, to exchange the dignity of conscience for the chains of fear. The question, then, is not only why voices are killed but why so many voices never rise at all. Each generation has witnessed courageous souls who faced persecution, but also countless others who looked on in silence. The oppressors strike down the few, but it is the silence of the many that grants them power. If the multitudes who know what is right would speak, persecution would falter. If the crowds who see injustice would rise, oppression would wither. Yet time and again, fear restrains the tongue, and truth is left to be carried by the few while the many shrink back into the shadows. This fear is not invincible, but it can only be overcome when men remember the higher order to which they belong. The voice of conscience is not a private possession, but a divine gift, binding man to a reality greater than himself. To betray that voice for the sake of comfort or acceptance is to betray the very essence of humanity. When men understand this, fear loses its grip. For what is ridicule compared to the loss of dignity? What is exclusion compared to the loss of integrity? What is even death compared to the loss of truth itself? The just have always chosen fidelity over fear, and their witness calls others to do the same. The real question, therefore, is not why the just are slain, for this has been the fate of truth bearers throughout history. The real question is why so many remain silent, why so many allow fear to master them, why so many prefer the illusion of safety to the nobility of courage. In that silence lies the greater tragedy, for while persecution may destroy the body of the few, fear destroys the souls of the many. It is not the power of tyrants alone that suppresses truth, but the consent of the fearful who dare not speak.